Hello, everyone. Welcome to our community forum. Our presenter today will be Mary Tallouzi from the Wounded Warrior Project. Before I hand the meeting over to Mary, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what is happening here at the Mustard Seed. We just had the ribbon cutting for our new assisted living last Saturday, and that was a great success. And we are looking forward to our first residents moving in the middle of January. If you would like to arrange a tour or you would like more information about our assisted living homes, please contact our front desk and we will put you in touch with Denise McCarthy, who is the director of the assisted living. Coming up, we have one more community forum for this year, and that will be on December 15th. And Carolyn Benepe, our new nutrition manager, will be telling us all about herself and what she plans for the coming year as far as exciting programs, all to do with food. And we're really looking forward to that. Before then, on December 6th, we will have a Santa for Seniors sit-down lunch here at the Crandall Center. And on the 7th, for those who can't participate in that, we will have a drive-through Santa for Seniors event where you can pick up a delicious lunch and talk to Santa and take that home to eat. On December 8th, from 4 till 7, we have a artist reception and holiday art fair here at the Mustard Seed. We will have several artists with Christmas gifts for sale, and you can look at the art exhibit that's up on the walls currently by Chris Bronstad and have some snacks and a little beverage. Please join us then. And again, for more information, please call the front desk 253-884-9814. Now I would like to introduce Mary Tallouzi from the Wounded Warrior Project. Mary grew up in a military family and has been a military caregiver for quite a few years. And I will let her tell you more about her experiences and what we can do to get involved. Thank you, Mary, and welcome.
Thank you, Maureen, for sharing, part of your day with me today. The greatest tragedy is being forgotten, and that happens to a lot of our veterans across the nation. It's happened throughout the generations. But, just kind of thinking it from my perspective of today's conflicts that our young men and women are involved in, our young people are surviving some wounds that had never been survived before. And that's kind of where I come in as well. On September 25th of 2006, I was notified that my young 22-year-old Sergeant, Daniel Tallouzi, had been severely injured while in Iraq. The main message that I received from the DoD is that the main injury is to his head. And I just remembered thinking, what does that mean? And they mentioned the right side. And I thought, okay, I'm trying to paint a picture in my mind, but not only can I not hear the words distinctly, I asked my daughter for a pen and paper so that I can write the words I am hearing, because between what I'm hearing and my brain is having a little trouble receiving. And so I'm writing down hit on the right side, main injury to his head. I'm on standby for Landstuhl, Germany. And I knew right off the bat that was not a good deal. My oldest son, Christopher, had served in Iraq the year before and had already been expedited. He was on his way to Landstuhl, Germany. My daughter and I followed a day behind. And that was because the DoD arranged to have tickets at the Albuquerque airport. I'm from New Mexico. And they had tickets at the Albuquerque airport the following day at 5 a.m. We were to fly to Washington, D.C. Neither of us had a passport. So we spent exactly 1 hour. I remember being picked up at the airport in D.C., driven to get our passports, and having an hour to just have a bite to eat before we boarded a plane to Landstuhl, Germany. And our journey began, as my daughter Jennifer and I sat about 5 rows apart I was smack dab in the middle of this huge aircraft, and she was 5 rows behind me. And how I wish someone had traded seats with us, but that didn't happen. But that would be the least of my problems. I was just trying to telepathically reassure Daniel, if you can imagine, that I'm on my way and I'm going to be bringing him home. And when we arrived at Landstuhl, Germany, I just remembered being escorted again by a couple of military men from the Army who picked me up at the airport, delivered me to the gates of Landstuhl. And I just remembered once I crossed that checkpoint, I had no idea what I would encounter. I was envisioning in my head, if this is such a severe traumatic brain injury, what must that look like? And I just needed a visual. I needed to stand next to my son at his bedside and just touch him, reassure him that I'm there, let him know I'm taking him home. And I remembered stepping out of somewhere and I wasn't sure what, and it was an elevator. And as I stepped out of the elevator with my peripheral vision, I saw Dan, and I made a straight line to him. And I just remembered immediately touching his arm, placing my hand on his arm and saying, "It's Mom, I'm here. Your sister and I just arrived. Did you know that your brother has been here with you? He waited a whole day for us to get here. Dan, we're going to take you home." And just at that moment, I felt the slightest nudge. And I thought, there you are. And I said it exactly as I felt it. There you are. We're taking you home, Dan. And as I looked up and saw this entourage of people around his bed, I just imagined what they must have been thinking about this mother, because here she is. The next words out of her mouth are, "How quickly can we get him to Bethesda?" Anyone who's in the military knows Bethesda is for the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the President of the United States. Daniel was Army. But I asked how soon he could get to Bethesda because I felt there was an angel waiting for him there. Well, by the end of the week, Dan was the last person put on a gurney and taken to a bus to be put on a plane and flown to Bethesda. You see, the Army owned the equipment, but Bethesda had the expertise, and it all was at their compound. Dan was accompanied by my son, because the other thing I promised Dan was that he would not go home alone. Either myself or my son Chip would accompany him. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as they could tell by looking at Chip, he was military, and they said, "You'll fly back with your brother." I forgot, and I remembered reflecting after the boys left, like, oh my God, what did I just do to my oldest son? I put him in a position where he's going to have to make, choices, decisions. And sure enough, when he arrived at Bethesda, they immediately took Daniel into the operating room and had my older son sign with permission to do whatever was necessary in case of bleeding or swelling of the brain. Jenny and I arrived the next day. So our journey was from Landstuhl, Germany to Bethesda. And then October of 2006, the year he was injured, we were transferred to Walter Reed. I really wasn't sure why, because the same doctors kept coming over to see him. And, it's just a matter of what branch of service he was in, and the fact that the people who would connect me with benefits and all that other stuff that they were concerned with, because this mother had her eye on her son. And I remembered meeting this group of people that came into our room as we transferred to Walter Reed, and they presented themselves as Wounded Warrior Project and spoke directly to Dan, when even then, that early in his injury, people were speaking to the mother at the bedside and not the warrior, not the soldier. But they spoke to Daniel and they thanked him for his service. And they said, "We are here for you. And Dan, we see your mother. She is by your bedside, and you need to know that she is not alone." Well, that's a big deal for a mom who's been a single parent their whole life. I just remember thinking to myself, thank you so much. They had a backpack. It had t-shirts and socks and underwear and a jacket and shorts. And, I just looked at it and thought, they know the same thing I know, that Dan is going to be able to get up and move one of these days. That was my hope. And everything inside of me, my hope, my faith, everything that I was holding dear to me in regard to Daniel's health just flourished. And they left my room. And then I had a card and it had a name on it. And he said, call me anytime anything happens that you need help with. And I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. But in the back of my mind, I thought I need to deal with what's in front of me. I have a 6'4" soldier weighing 195 pounds. He's muscle on bone. He's the most beautiful specimen of a man you've ever seen. And all that was wrapped was his head. And protruding from his head was a tube, and it was dripping fluid into this jar that was hanging next to his bed. And I just kept looking at that thinking, oh my God, what does this mean? The traumatic brain injury at that point, we didn't know what we were going to do with it as a nation. And as a parent, I just needed to know, where was this taking me? And I was just about to learn everything I could about a traumatic brain injury as severe as Dan's. I saw the CT scans. I saw the dark pools of just blackness, just cells that had been damaged. His brain had areas that were damaged that were just dark spots, on his CT scan. And I thought, okay, but he's 22 years old. And if I remember correctly, on a brain injury with people who are young, they're able to recover, some of that brain matter, and all these things start happening, but he was completely in a coma. They had him in an induced coma, as well as he was in a coma from the injury itself. So when we left Walter Reed, we went to the Richmond Polytrauma in Virginia. At the Richmond Polytrauma, we did what was called the rehumanization of Daniel Tallouzi. That backpack that I got, those clothes were put on him. All I had to do was go find a size 14 shoe. Now, mind you, a 14 shoe is a 14 shoe. And I remembered everybody thinking, whoa, who is she buying those shoes for? Well, that was Daniel. Oh my goodness, they started physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech, about 15 minutes of each thing. And when the Richmond Polytrauma decided that it was time to move Daniel forward, I said, wait. When he was in Balad, put your hand on your head like this. That's how much skull they removed. Are you not going to replace that here? And then so many things had happened at Walter Reed that I was afraid for them to work on him again surgically in such a delicate matter, but they had that expertise. But I said, when we moved him to Richmond, I said, you can't just move him. And when he was at Richmond, I addressed it again, and sure enough, that took place. And his that part of his skull was replaced, and we were again faced with, where will you take him? And I made my trip home to my VA here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just to realize that they were offering him a geriatric ward. And I said no, because by then he was 23. And I'm shaking my head thinking, oh my God, where do I go from here? As a mom and a caregiver, having made all the decisions in their lives so far, this was most definitely the most challenging time I've ever had. I was going back to Richmond in dismay. What am I going to do now? And my brother, who is a retired Marine, and my older son sent me a CNN link to an article of two warriors that were in a hospital called Kessler Rehab in New Jersey. It was state of the art. They were doing brain research. They were using a holistic approach, vitamins and minerals, electrical stimulation to remind them how their body moves, where their muscles are, to get them back into action, so to speak. And physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, an entire hour for each for a comatose patient. And I thought, oh my God. And the gist of the story is they had two other soldiers there who had been awakened out of their coma after being in a coma for 2 years. This was state of the art. And I thought, if those guys are there, my Dan needs to go there. And we fought for that. It was like pulling teeth, but with the help of Wounded Warrior Project, once again, I had that card with me. And every time I had an obstacle, I would call and say, this is what I'm thinking, what else can I do? And I said, this woman went before Congress to fight for her son, to have him at Kessler Rehab, and she won, and the Army now has him there, and they have another soldier that followed suit. I want Dan to have the same experience. He is in a complete coma. If he has a chance of waking up, it should be at this facility. And so we got him to Kessler. We were successful. And yes, I was scared to death because we were leaving a military environment and going into the private sector. But everything I learned, I knew I was going to have to put under my belt, take it home with me, and be able to work with Dan once we were released from that facility. The other two soldiers stayed for 12 weeks. Dan stayed for 7 months. Dan stayed for 7 months because one day I walked in his room and he was staring at the ceiling, wondering where he was. And I kept thinking, there's something different about his face. What is going on? And as he stared, I noticed he was moving the muscles, his jaw, his forehead. He was furrowing his brow. And then all of a sudden, he just reached out and just took this big yawn like he just needed to stretch. And I thought, oh my God. And I'm yelling at the nurse, come here, come here. And she comes in the room and she's as excited as I am. And we can't find the doctor anywhere. So the very next day he comes in and he says, I understand you had a very exciting day. I said, oh, yes, we did. And from that point on, it was dropping the phone off his table and him turning in that direction to see what happened. It was him seeing his reflection in the mirror as I was seeing on a blue ball, exercising, holding his head, and he's facing the mirror. And I realized he just saw himself. And the therapist saw the same thing. And I just went immediately into conversation. Do you know where you are? Do you know how hard it was to get you here? And Dan, this is great. Let's just keep moving forward. Let's keep moving forward, so that when Kessler said, what will you do now? They informed me that time was not my enemy. No, it's not. Time is what I needed with Dan. And you will be the teacher wherever you take him. Back to New Mexico, it's going to be up to you to teach the Southwest how to take care of a patient like Dan. So I immediately called my Marine Corps brother that was retired and my daughter, who were both here in Albuquerque, and said, you need to go to these two places and check them out. Which one is most like Kessler? Which one will give me the therapies I need? And they found it. So we came to New Mexico because at that time I was even comfortable. Dan needs to smell, the green chili roasting, in August, and he needs to be around family and the familiar voices he used to hear. His friends need to come over and visit with him. Everywhere I went with Dan, I was in the same room. Everywhere I went with Dan, I didn't leave him until I had to visit my VA, until we did transition home. But I came home knowing that I would be the teacher. I would be the person to tell that facility, he's young. They had a walking simulator. Would you put him on a walking simulator? Because he's not bearing any weight. Can he at least see how his body moves once again? And sure enough, they put him in a simulator and he locked it. And when he locked it, the people around him were just so excited. And they're like, oh my God. And of course, I was like, there you go. There you are, Dan. Let's keep this up. I mean, honey, you're doing so great. And one day I had gone for a sandwich. When I came back, they were running him up and down this one hallway, because remember, he's 6'4", and he was on a standing frame. So now he's about 6'7", 6'8". And that was the only space that didn't have a doorway that they might hit his head on. And they were running him back and forth. And when I returned, he looked so tired. And I said, have you had enough, buddy? Do you want us to get you off? And the kid said, call her. Tell her you want off. And he just said, Mom, as loud as he could. The nurses at the station broke out in tears. The kids that were with him were like, oh my God. And the young man that was standing in front of him, tears were just coming down his face. I said, he's young like you. I want you to remember that every time you work with Dan. As his mom, I knew how dignified Dan was. Oh my God, he was meticulous professionally and personally. I mean, when When he took on the capacity of a helicopter electrician with the Army, he wanted to score his highest score. He wanted to be the best, electrical, mechanic on his Apache helicopter. He wanted to make sure that his men were safe when they flew. Personally, Dan never stepped out of the house with his hair in a mess or not wearing nice clothes or not smelling like $1,000,000. He just didn't do that. And I remembered all of that about Dan, and to keep his dignity and to keep everything about Dan, just familiar to him. I had his colognes, I had his deodorant, everything that he wore. And I every day shaved him and every day took such good care of him that, I would get irritated at certain things. I would see other patients, like they would be out in the hallway just sitting there. And maybe some of them couldn't speak. Maybe they, like Dan, they had a traumatic brain injury, they couldn't speak. And I thought, oh my God, that one day I had to leave him at a nurse's station. And I said, if I come back and he is outside of his room sitting like that, you're not going to hear the end of it from me, because that is Daniel Tallouzi. We do not display him like what? It was very offensive to me. As a parent, I always wondered, like, does anybody else feel this way? And when I got back from a 1-hour appointment, I hated leaving him. And when I got back, he was in the nurse's station and they said, Dan's been back here helping us. And I just laughed about it because I said, that's wonderful. And I took him back to his room because he deserved respect. He deserved to keep his dignity. He did not need to have anything on his face that shouldn't be there. I mean, he was being tube fed, but regardless, it's like if anything was out of place, I fixed it for him because I was his mom and I knew Dan and I introduced him to everyone I knew. As a matter of fact, one doctor asked me one day at Walter Reed, why, Mrs. Tallouzi, why do you insist? And I looked at him and I said, he is my son, sir. And I said, may I? And I grabbed his hand and I said, may I introduce you to this young sergeant? And I put his hand on my son's arm and I said, this is Daniel Tallouzi. Do you know what he has done for you? He would just like the same in return. So every time we hit a roadblock, I was able to call a number and I was asked questions like, do you know your representatives for your state? If not, we can get that for you. Do you know who your governor is? We need to let him know this is happening to his New Mexico soldier. I mean, it was incredible. And the woman who got her son there, having gone before Congress, paved the way for us to be there. And, I even was successful in putting a house together for Dan and bringing him home. You're looking at it. This is Dan's home. And I just remembered, like, okay, he has to have color because Dan loves color. He's not a dull person. He's not a beige person. And so my daughter was very intricate in making sure the walls were painted differently, et cetera. I mean, even to that point, everything was put in place except for a tracking system. We moved in January 1st of 2009. Dan had a few setbacks and I rushed him to the hospital. He had problems with his motility, the ability to digest, even tube feeding. On February 28th of 2009, Daniel died. For 2 years and 5 months, I took care of Daniel. I knew who he was. I needed people who took care of Daniel to know who he was and what he expected and how he would interact. So in this introduction that I spent doing throughout this journey, I was so happy I did that. I kept his integrity. But the one thing that I knew in my head was that I wasn't going to institutionalize my son. He was a young person. Young people are vibrant. They have the possibility of rejuvenating. And that's what I kept in the back of my mind. But when God took him, I had no choice. I had to let go. And I had to realize that just like that woman helped me by having her son be seen by the private sector and getting the best care in the world, that's what I needed to do for the next mom. That's what I needed to tell them. Everything is possible when you have the drive and the desire to get the best you can for your son. Never forget what they have done for this country. Never forget. You know, at Wounded Warrior Project today, as a national speaker for them, I'm so grateful to have seen not only a caregiver respite being approved initially, but also a caregiver stipend where we were citizens of our communities who were fully employed, paid taxes, did everything that everybody else does. Some of us were well known more than others, and some of us worked every day because we needed to. And, you know, as parents, we give up our space in life because that person in front of you is so important that you will do almost anything to make sure that they receive the best. When Wounded Warrior Project gave the stipend, it gave back a little dignity to that caregiver who had lost a job, who used to mean something, who had a position and a title. And now she's a caregiver 24/7. When I became a speaker for Wounded Warrior Project, there were 250 families with sons or daughters like my son. Today, there are 600. They created the Independence Program. And this is what I want you to hear. Through the Independence Program, when the government, when a doctor says there's no more sign of improvement, blah, 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 you know, we're not going to provide physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech. Well, Wounded Warrior Project said, no, let's wait a minute. Let's go into the communities, into their areas, and let's see what resources are available to them. There are people who are, you know, who will give them, you know, speech therapy in a facility or speech therapy at home. There are professionals. There are professionals who are into music therapy, into art therapy, into riding a horse, into providing a dog. I mean, think about it. Think of all the things that people can do to enhance someone else's life. And when Wounded Warrior Project saw all those families, they said, we do not accept the status quo. We are in turn going to invest and make sure that these people have the money. We have the money to provide the services for those veterans at their homes at no cost to them. At no cost to them. All of our programs and services are at no cost to them. They become what we call alumni. They've shared an experience that a lot of us will never understand. They've been in an environment that a lot of us will never live. And they've survived. And they've suffered injuries, whether, you know, physical, psychological, whether it's a traumatic brain injury, burns, diseases, you name it. If they need assistance, we're going to take care of them at no cost to them. That's the beauty of it, because we get to partner with people who are experts in post-traumatic stress. There are facilities across the nation. Again, our warriors go there at no cost to them because they have not been successful in their therapies that they have searched out so far. And so Wounded Warrior Project goes that extra mile. What they do for the really severely injured is incredible. And you need to know that a parent passed away, and he was 55 years old, and he was the sole caregiver for his son. And when he passed away, Wounded Warrior Project said, who is going to step in to this young man's life? He has his own home. He has his therapies, everything provided for him. Who will step in and become the caregiver? And if there is such a person, we will support that. This is where facilities come in the sense of services, where they can provide a service at someone's home. I am amazed at our Independence Program. When we did an investment on a long-term trust for these most severely warriors, we were thinking about that exact thing. What happens when the parent or the caregiver dies? Who takes care of that warrior? And it can be a family member, it can be a best friend, but it will stay in their home if that is exactly what they wish. I love that about Wounded Warrior Project. I love its innovativeness in the way they think. I like that they take a survey every year and they find out what are the obstacles that our warriors are facing today and how can we make that better? How can we assist? Is it through legislation? Is it through another service or program? Is it through a partnership? Because we need to partner with folks that think the same way we do, that have a holistic approach to being successful in your recovery. I totally understand what we're doing at Wounded Warrior Project. And I hope that the mindset of America changes. Everything is not okay with our warriors. They cannot just be given a stipend and sent home on their own. They have to be taken care of, and some of them need to be taken care of for a lifetime. You know, Maureen, what you do is very important. And I think that the biggest key is in knowing that when someone comes to your facility, that if that person can't tell you themselves, that their family would say, this is who this is how they are, and this is what we expect. And that is carried forward because it has everything to do with dignity and integrity and taking the best care of our loved ones. I thank you so much for your time today. If you have any other questions or would like to check into woundedwarriorproject.org, there are videos and just a plethora of information that you can see and view. And I hope you do that. And I hope that you recommend that someone do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'm not sure if you mentioned it at the beginning. I was so wrapped up in your personal story. How long between Dan's injury and Wounded Warrior getting in touch with you? How long did that take?
Because he was flown to Bethesda, that was September, like he was injured September 25th, right? So let's say it's 5 days and he's at Bethesda. He transferred to Walter Reed, and it's when he transferred to Walter Reed that they came to meet us at Walter Reed, because it was the Army hospital, and they visited the Army hospital to meet, everyone that was incoming. Believe me, I was in a surgical ICU setting for 7 months, and everything that I saw was incredible. And I just wondered about so many, and yet today I see so many that have not only survived, but they are thriving. I think that's wonderful.
Did you get any respite when you were Daniel's full-time caregiver? What kind of help did you get?
In 2 years and 5 months, I refused to take a break from Dan, because it seemed like in the back of my mind, I knew that every second counted. I didn't know which was going to be the last. And so the times that I left him were like to visit the VA in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was to transition him, but I was with him. We flew everywhere together. And whether it was a C-130 or a small plane bringing us to Albuquerque, I was with him. And all of the facilities that I was in, I was either in a chair, or they had a recliner, or they had an extra bed, and I was in the same room. So it was very intense. And I love that the mothers that I have met along the way, I mean, like, I have a mom in my backyard that's on her 17th year with her son. She totally has to move him, every part of him for him. And she has the therapist come to her house. She has his therapy room set up for him, whether it's a VA benefit or whether it's the service that is provided. And she is part of the Independence program. So everything her son receives is no cost to him.
How can the general public get involved with the Wounded Warrior Project?
Well, number one, it's not like I can, provide a list of warriors in your area. We all know about HIPAA, but number two, a lot of times we meet someone and we see their situation. And like this caregiver I'm talking about, all we do is go for a cup of coffee, because do you know what she wants to do? She just wants to be able to say whatever she needs to say with no judgment. She's not looking for an answer. She just needs an escape. And that is amazing. And, as far as the people that come to her home, they're pretty darn amazing too. Like there's a young man that comes and spends 4 hours every morning with her son, and she can go grocery shopping, or she can, go run an errand that she has to run. Or sometimes she just, sits at home and reads a book while this person is with him, and then the rest of the day is hers. She has someone that helps her get him up in the morning and put him to bed at night, cleaning him up, etc. I mean, we're doing everything. We held them as babies, and we're doing the same thing in their 20s and 30s. And they've evolved. They're 30 and 40 years old now, and so it's interesting to me, because there are some mothers who are really like too connected. That's me. I was too connected. And then there are mothers who can take a break. I mean, they can actually leave for 4 days or a week, or go on a vacation with their husband. They need to do that. They really need to do that. I never experienced it. It was just that thing that I had going on with Daniel, and just the uncertainty. We had such great moments. I wouldn't have missed those for the world.
Did you feel that he was responding to you when?
Absolutely.
You were there with him? Yeah.
I felt like I watched my friend Christine, and she can understand her son very well. I can understand her son to a certain point. Like, he will actually mouth the words, and I'll try to, like, if I'm stuck, I'll say, "Are you saying this? Are you saying that?" And he gets all frustrated with me, because he really is saying what he wants to say. But I laughed, because I said, "Oh, Eric, am I ever going to get this right?" And it's just he gets to laugh about it. I get to laugh about it. And it's just, having that type of communication of being able to spend time together. So, but she definitely knows what he says all the time. And I'm like, I don't get it, Christine. I don't know. And yet I felt the connection when I was with my own son.
Yeah.
It's like when they're babies and they're hurting.
Yeah.
Or they're happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Maureen,
Well,
I was going to say, I really respect what you guys do, because, you're taking care of people that need someone. I mean, you really are. And I think it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to do that.
It sounds as though you have lived and breathed the values that we have at the Mustard Seed, which is respect, integrity, compassion,
Yes,
collaboration, and creativity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You have lived that.
I have lived that. Yes. And, I have an older son and I have a daughter, and I, like a mom, I worry about them. And one lives in Texas and one lives in Los Angeles, and I'm in New Mexico. When they pop into my head, I'm the mom that gets on and says, "Hey, how's everything going? Haven't heard from you," or whatever. And one time my daughter said, "Mom, you are reaching stalking status." And I'm like, okay, I'll back up. I'll back off, But it's just who we are. We're all different. We're not all the same.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
This recording will be not only stay on our Facebook Live, but it will be posted on our YouTube channel. And
Okay.
I will send you a link as soon as it's up there that you can share with other people whenever you wish.
That's awesome. Thank you.
If there are no other questions from anyone else, I will thank you very much for this presentation and for your heartfelt words and for your care of your son.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate that.
We will hope to have you back at some point in the future. And
okay, that sounds wonderful. And I have another caregiver mom, and we have warriors that are willing to speak also. So remember that. Yeah, yes. Remember that. Okay. Yes. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.